Hello and welcome to Cozy Mysteries Unveiled, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today I, Dr. John Watson, shall recount one of the most perplexing cases from my time with the inimitable Sherlock Holmes. The winter darkness revealed. Settle in, dear listeners, as we journey back to the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, where shadows hide secrets and the chill of winter conceals more than mere frost. Chapter 1. The Chill of the Client's Arrival. It was the 22nd of the month, a Tuesday, and the clocks had just struck 7:30. The sky above Regent's Park was the color of tarnished pewter, and the snow that had threatened all day was at last falling in earnest. Great soft flakes that melted on the pane the instant they touched it, as though even the glass were too cold to bear them. In our sitting room the fire roared with a cheerful defiance, throwing out a circle of gold that reached the Persian rug and stopped just short of Holmes's slippered feet. He lay sprawled in the basket chair, one knee drawn up, the other leg dangling, his violin across his lap like a sleeping cat. A blue haze of tobacco drifted above his head. He had been smoking his oldest black shag since tea time, and the room was fragrant with it, fragrant and faintly acrid, the way a battlefield smells after the guns have cooled. I sat opposite, my boots steaming on the fender, turning the pages of the Lancet with a pretense of attention. In truth, I was watching Holmes. He had not spoken in an hour, and when Sherlock Holmes is silent for an hour, it is never from idleness. His eyes, those keen gray eyes, were fixed upon the ceiling, yet I would swear he saw nothing of the plaster rose or the gas mantel. He was listening to something far beyond the walls of Baker Street. The slow, deliberate footfall of a case approaching through the snow. At length the expected knock came. 3 sharp raps, military in their precision. Mrs. Hudson's slippers pattered along the oilcloth below. Her voice rose in muffled protest. A deeper voice answered, urgent, feminine, edged with tears. Then the stairs creaked, slowly as though each step cost the climber dear, and the door was flung open upon a gust of wind that set the lamp flames dancing and scattered snow across the rug like spilled salt. The woman who stood upon our threshold might have stepped out of one of Mr. Dickens's more melancholy illustrations. She was perhaps 45, though anxiety had added a decade to her looks. Her cloak, once costly sable, now threadbare at the cuffs, was white with half-melted flakes. Her bonnet had slipped askew, revealing a knot of iron-gray hair pinned with trembling haste. One gloved hand clutched a reticule of black jet beads. The other pressed a handkerchief to her lips as if to stifle a sob that had been a full day in the making. Her eyes, large, dark, and magnificently frightened, swept the room, lingered on Holmes, and filled with the desperate hope of a drowning sailor sighting a mast. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she whispered. Holmes was on his feet before the second syllable left her mouth. He crossed the room in 3 silent strides, closed the door against the draught, and drew forward the armchair that faced the fire. "Madam, you are perishing of cold. Watson, the brandy. 2 fingers, no water. Mrs. Hudson, hot water, lemon, and honey, if you please. Pray sit, madam, you are among friends." I bustled to the sideboard, uncorked the decanter, and pressed the glass into her shaking fingers. She drank obediently, coughed once, and the color returned to her cheeks in a faint, painful flush. Holmes resumed his seat, but now he was all attention. Elbows on knees, chin upon interlaced fingers, the violin forgotten on the table. "Compose yourself," he said gently. "When you are ready, tell us everything exactly as it happened. Omit nothing, however trivial it may seem." She drew a long, shuddering breath. The fire crackled. Outside, a cab horse slipped on the ice and a driver cursed. At last she began, "My name is Eleanor Hargrove, Mrs. Reginald Hargrove of number 14, Cheney Walk, Chelsea. My husband is, God help me, was a tea importer of some note. Hargrove and Sons, East India Wharf. 3 nights ago, Saturday last, he left the warehouse at dusk, promising to be home by 8. He never arrived. Holmes's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Saturday the 19th, a bitter night. Go on. I waited until midnight. At 1 o'clock, I sent the maid to the wharf. The watchman swore my husband had left at 6, coat buttoned to the throat, lantern in hand. No cab was taken. The fog was too thick for the river steamers. He simply vanished. Here, she faltered. I refilled her glass. She drank again, steadier now. Yesterday morning, she continued, I woke to find these words traced upon the inside of our bedroom window. In frost, Mr. Holmes, as though written by an icy finger while we slept. The darkness reveals all. The letters were 2 inches high, perfectly formed. By the time the maid fetched hot water, they had melted into runnels down the pane. The window was locked. The room had not been entered. Inspector Lestrade came, laughed, said it was a hoax or a lover's quarrel. But Reginald has no enemies, sir, and no secrets from me, none that could merit this. Holmes leaned forward until the firelight glittered in his eyes. Describe your husband's appearance, his dress that evening. 52 years old, 5 feet 10, upright carriage, military once in the Bengal Staff Corps. Clean-shaven, iron-gray hair, a small scar on the left cheek from a gills-eye bullet. He wore his usual ulster, dark blue velvet collar, and a top hat slightly dented on the crown. In his pocket always a silver hunter watch engraved R.H. from E.H., 1875. And in his right hand, waistcoat pocket. She stopped, pressed the handkerchief to her eyes, and whispered, A curious thing. A little tin box, no larger than a match safe, containing a pinch of pale green powder that glows in the dark. He called it winter fire, a novelty from Calcutta. He would open it on the stairs to light his way without a candle. Childish, I told him, but he was proud of it. Holmes's gaze flicked to me, sharp, exultant. I felt the old thrill. The hound has scented the fox. One more particular, he said. You mentioned a shipment lately arrived, tea mingled with curiosities? Mrs. Hargrove nodded. A fortnight ago, the SS Ganymede out of Chittagong. 20 chests of Assam, yes, but also a sealed crate addressed personally to Reginald. He opened it in the warehouse, would not let even the clerk see. I heard him laugh, such a laugh as I have not heard since our courtship, and say, Eleanor, my dear, the darkness is about to become very profitable indeed. That was all. Holmes rose and paced to the window. Snow blurred the street lamps into golden halos. Somewhere below, a muffin man's bell sounded mournful and far away. Mrs. Hargrove, he said without turning, your husband is alive. The words hung in the air like a chord resolved. Our visitor gasped, half rose, then sank back, tears spilling freely now. Alive, but where? And why this cruel silence? That, said Holmes, wheeling to face her, is what we shall discover. The message on the pane was no idle threat, it was a signature. The glowing powder is the key, the sealed crate the lock. Someone, something, has lured your husband into the winter darkness, and they have left us a trail luminous enough for even a Scotland Yard bloodhound to follow. He crossed to the mantel, took down his cherry-wood pipe, and began filling it with deliberate care. Watson, my old campaigner, fetch your revolver. We leave within the hour. Mrs. Hargrove, return home, lock every door, admit no one until you hear 3 taps thus. He rapped on the table, shave and a haircut. My private signal. Tomorrow the Yard will have its runaway husband. Tonight Sherlock Holmes has a phantom to unmask. She stood steady now and pressed both our hands in turn. At the door she paused. Mr. Holmes, bring him back to me before Christmas. I have no heart for Holly without him. The door closed. The room seemed suddenly larger, colder, as though her fear had taken half the fire with it. Holmes stood motionless, pipe unlit, eyes glittering. "Watson," he murmured, "do you recall the case of the speckled band? How a locked room may yet admit a serpent? Tonight we deal not with adders, but with eclipses. Somewhere in this frozen city a man is being forced to confront a truth so bright it must be hidden in absolute dark. And the powder, phosphorus, radium salts, perhaps a new compounder discovery, will light our way." He struck a match. The flame leapt blue, then gold. In its flare his face was aquiline, eager, almost boyish. "Come, Watson, the game is afoot, and the board is white with snow." I fetched my coat, my service revolver, and the old army notebook in which so many strange histories have been inscribed. As we clattered down the 17 steps to the street, the snow was already ankle-deep, muffling the wheels of a passing growler. Holmes paused on the threshold, drew a lungful of the cutting air, and laughed softly. "Listen, Watson. The city is holding its breath. Somewhere out there a clock has stopped at the darkest hour, and we are the only 2 men in London awake enough to wind it." He stepped into the whirl of white, and I followed, the door of 221B banging shut behind us like the first stroke of midnight. Little did I know, as our boots crunched away into the fog, that before the week was out we should descend into laboratories lit by no earthly lamp, pursue a phantom ship across the frozen Thames, and stand in a cellar where the very darkness glowed with betrayal. But that is a tale for later chapters. Tonight belonged to the snow, the woman's tears, and the first faint glimmer of a green and ghostly light that promised revelation or ruin. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Fog. We left Baker Street at 8:15, the snow already deep enough to swallow the echo of our boots. Holmes had exchanged his dressing gown for the mouse-colored ulster and close-fitting cloth cap that made him indistinguishable from any other lean, hungry medical student prowling the night. I wore my old regimental greatcoat, the revolver heavy in the pocket, and carried the dark lantern he pressed into my hand with a murmured, "Mind the slide, old fellow. We may need darkness more than light." The fog that night was of the true London particular, yellow, sulphurous, and thick enough to chew. Gas lamps floated like stranded moons. The street was a tunnel of drifting gold. Holmes hailed a growler at the corner of Marylebone Road. The cabman, muffled to the eyes, needed no urging. "East India Wharf, governor, and a half-sovereign if we beat the tide." The horse plunged forward, bells jingling, and we were swallowed by the city's throat. Holmes sat opposite me, knees drawn up, gloved fingers drumming a silent tattoo on the windowsill. In the occasional flare of a lamp I saw his profile, hawk keen, eager, already 3 moves ahead of the quarry. "Observe, Watson," he said softly. "The fog is our ally tonight. Sound is muffled, scent lingers, footprints fill slowly. A man may vanish in such weather, yet the weather itself becomes his biographer." I grunted agreement, conserving breath for the cold. The cab lurched across London Bridge. Beneath us the Thames lay black and silent, broken only by the red eye of a barge lantern sliding upstream. Somewhere a steam whistle moaned like a lost soul. We clattered on, past the tower, where ravens croaked on the battlements, past Billingsgate, where the fish porters were already unloading their glittering cargo under hissing naphtha flares. At last the cab pulled up before the high gates of Hargrove and Sons. A single lamp burned above the wicket. The rest of the wharf was a cavern of shadow. Holmes paid the driver with a flourish of silver, then pressed his thumb to the bell. A night watchman appeared, lantern swinging, his face a map of broken veins and suspicion. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes to see the foreman, Mr. Jenkins. Mrs. Hargrove's compliments." The name worked like a charm. Bolts shot back. We stepped into a courtyard ankle-deep in snow and scented with Darjeeling and Lapsang. Crates towered on every side, stenciled in languages I could not read. From the river came the slap of water against piles and the distant clang of a buoy. Jenkins awaited us in the counting house. A squat, bull-necked man with a sailor's roll and a clay pipe clamped between gold teeth. His left leg dragged slightly. An old injury I diagnosed, probably a compound fracture badly set. He touched his forelock, but his eyes were wary. "Bad business, gentlemen. The governor was here Saturday right enough. Checked the new consignment himself, signed the manifest, then off into the fog with his lantern, never seen again." Holmes's gaze swept the room. Ledgers, brass scales, a half-empty bottle of rum. On the wall hung a tide table and a colored lithograph of the SS Ganymede. He moved to the manifest, ran a finger down the columns. "Chest 47, he murmured, "marked curios, handle with care. Opened in your presence?" Jenkins hesitated. "Aye, sir. Mr. Hargrove prized the lid himself. Inside, tea, same as always, but packed around a wooden box no bigger than a biscuit tin." He laughed, said it was a present for the missus. Took it away under his coat. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And the symbol on the lid?" The foreman scratched his jaw. "Funny you should ask. An eye inside a crescent moon carved deep. Looked heathenish. Gave me the creeps." We followed Jenkins into the warehouse proper. The doors rolled back on greased runners. Darkness rushed out to meet us like a living thing. Holmes slid the dark lantern open a finger's breadth. A blade of yellow light cut the gloom, revealing avenues of chests stacked to the rafters. The air was warm with the breath of 1,000 leaves, Assam, Peko, Souchong. Yet beneath it ran another scent. Something metallic, almost electric. Holmes knelt beside chest 47. The lid was splintered where the crowbar had bitten. Inside, tea nestled in straw, but the center was hollow, a nest shaped to receive the missing box. He brushed the leaves aside. Grains of pale green powder clung to his glove, glowing faintly even in the lantern's beam. "Phosphorescence," I whispered, "but stable. Doesn't fade." "More than that," Holmes replied. "It responds to body heat. See?" He pressed a fingertip to the grains. They flared emerald, then subsided. A message written in this upon glass or mirror would appear only when breath or warmth passed over it. Our frost message on Mrs. Hargrove's window. Child's play. He straightened, lantern sweeping the floor. Boot prints led away toward the rear door. Broad, square-toed, a working man's boot. Beside them, almost obliterated by drifting tea dust, a narrower print, elegant pointed, the tread of a Bond Street shoe. Holmes measured both with a pocket tape. "2 men," he said. "One pursued, one pursuing. The narrow print overlays the broad. Our quarry was followed from this very spot." Jenkins shifted uneasily. "There's a side gate to the river stairs, open to any with the key." Holmes was already moving. We passed between the crates, the lantern's beam picking out strange shadows. A crate stenciled, "Calcutta, fragile." This side up tilted drunkenly. Another bore the same eye and moon brand burned deep with a hot iron. At the rear wall, a low door stood ajar. Snow had drifted across the threshold in a perfect fan. Holmes extinguished the lantern. For a moment we stood in absolute darkness, listening. The warehouse breathed around us, timbers creaking, rats scuttling, the faint lap of the river beyond. Then, from the alley outside, the scrape of a boot on iron. Holmes's hand closed on my wrist. Together we slipped through the door. The alley was a narrow throat between warehouse and wharf wall. Fog pressed down like wet wool. The only light came from a single gas jet 20 yards away, flickering over black water. Snow had ceased to fall. Every footprint stood out crisp and fresh. 2 sets led away from us, broad and narrow, then vanished beneath a third set, lighter, almost dancing. Holmes dropped to one knee. "A woman's shoe, Watson, French heel size 4. She stood here, waiting. See how the toe points inward? Nervous, listening. Then He traced a scuffed crescent. She ran. They all ran. He rose, coat swirling, and set off along the prints at a silent lope. I followed, revolver cocked. The alley twisted, descended a flight of slime-coated steps, and opened onto the river stairs. Here the tide had risen, lapping at the lowest tread. The footprints ended in a tangle of churned snow, and unmistakable a splash of crimson frozen to ruby beads. Holmes's lantern flared again. In its pool of light lay a single object, a man's kid glove, monogrammed RH, the index finger torn and dark with blood. I caught my breath. Hargrove! Holmes turned the glove inside out. No blood within, only a faint green luminescence, as though the powder had been sprinkled there deliberately. A lure, he said softly, dropped to suggest violence, yet the tear is old, the blood applied with a brush. Observe the even distribution. Amateur, theatrics. From the fog above came the sudden clatter of hooves. A hansom cab rounded the corner, lamps blazing. The driver lashed his horse straight toward us. Holmes snatched my arm. We leapt aside as the wheels hurled slush like shrapnel. The cab thundered past, and for an instant the fog parted. A woman's pale face at the window, eyes wide, mouth open in a soundless scream. Then darkness swallowed her. Holmes was already running, lanterns swinging. We reached the wharf gate as the cab vanished into the maze of Wapping. Footprints, broad, narrow, and the dancing French heel, led away into the night, already filling with fresh snow. Back in the counting house, Jenkins met us with a face the color of tallow. "Find anything, sirs?" Holmes fixed him with a stare that might have frozen the Thames. "Only what someone wished us to find. Tell me, Mr. Jenkins, when did you last see your nephew, Sir Edmund Blackwood's valet?" The pipe dropped from the foreman's mouth, scattering sparks across the ledger. For the first time that night, the shadows in the fog had a name. Chapter 3. The enigmatic letter. The hansom that had nearly run us down in Wapping vanished before we could note its number. But the woman's face, pale, oval, eyes black with terror, burned behind my eyelids all the way home. Holmes said nothing during the crawl back through the fog. He merely drummed his fingers on the window and hummed a snatch of Paganini that sounded to my strained ears, like the scrape of a bow across frozen wire. We reached Baker Street a little after midnight. Mrs. Hudson, bless her, had banked the fire and left a tray, cold roast beef, pickles, a bottle of bone, and a single envelope propped against the sugar bowl. The envelope was heavy cream, laid paper, sealed with black wax. In the blob of wax was impressed the same device we had seen on chest 47, an eye cradled in a crescent moon. Holmes snatched it up, slit the flap with his pocket knife, and drew out one sheet folded thrice. He read it aloud in the flat, unhurried voice he reserves for railway timetables and death warrants. "Seek the winter's veil where light fades eternal. The darkness reveals the betrayed. Come alone, or the tea merchant drinks the Thames. Strike one bell after matins. A friend." The handwriting was elegant, continental, the ink a deep sepia that smelled faintly of sandalwood. Holmes held the sheet to the lamp. The paper was watermarked J. Whatman, 1886, and cost, by my calculation, £1 a sheet in Bond Street. "Posted yesterday in the West Central District," he murmured. "Delivered by private messenger. Note the absence of postmarks. The seal is beeswax mixed with lamp black, a theatrical supplier's trick, and the phrasing, 'Strike one bell after matins,' is monastic. Our correspondent has a taste for the cloister." He turned the sheet to the firelight. Faint indentations appeared, writing impressed from a sheet that had lain beneath. Holmes traced them with a pencil. "An address," he announced. "Number 9, Chapel Court, Mayfair. A stationer's shop kept by one Monsieur Lefebvre. We shall pay our respects at dawn." I was bone-weary, but sleep was impossible. While Holmes prowled the room, violin under his chin, sawing out discords that made the coal scuttle ring, I examined the envelope again. Inside the flap, almost invisible, someone had pricked 4 tiny holes with a needle, forming the corners of a perfect square. "Holmes," I said, "a child's code. 4 dots, perhaps a map reference?" He stopped mid-note. "Or a warning. 4 holes, 4 gospels, 4 winds. But you are right, Watson, the paper itself is the map." He carried the envelope to the chemical corner, dissolved a pinch of the luminous powder in alcohol, and brushed the solution across the sheet. In the darkness, the square of holes glowed emerald. Between them, invisible ink blossomed into life, a minute diagram of the Thames from Limehouse to Chelsea, with a single cross at Blackfriars Bridge. "Tomorrow," Holmes said, "we follow the river at low tide. Tonight we follow the paper." We were in Chapel Court by 7, the snow still crisp underfoot. Lefebvre's shop was a narrow establishment wedged between a milliner and a cellar of ecclesiastical brasses. A bell tinkled as we entered. The air smelled of glue and Russia leather. Behind the counter stood a diminutive Frenchman with a waxed mustache and the bright, incurious eyes of a sparrow. "Messieurs," he chirped, "you seek the morning stationery, perhaps? Black borders, 1 inch?" Holmes laid the envelope on the counter. "We seek the gentleman who purchased this yesterday. Tall, limp in the left leg, paid with a Bank of England £5 note." Lefebvre's mustache drooped. "I recall him. A military man, I thought. Scar on the cheek, no? He bought 2 quires and a bottle of sepia. Said it was for a monastery in Bruges. Paid with a crisp £5, yes, and asked for the change in silver." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Did he leave a message?" The stationer reached beneath the counter and produced a second envelope, identical to the first. He said, "If a tall gentleman with a doctor comes asking, give him this." "You are the tall gentleman, I presume?" Holmes took the envelope without a word. Inside was a single playing card, the Queen of Spades, her eyes scratched out with a pin. I felt the hairs rise on my neck. "The betrayed," I whispered. Holmes slipped the card into his waistcoat. "Come, Watson, the game grows darker." We emerged into Mayfair's pale morning. The snow had ceased. The sky was the color of wet slate. Holmes hailed a cab and directed the driver to Blackfriars Bridge. As we bowled along the embankment, he spoke rapidly, half to himself. "Observe the progression, Watson. First the warehouse, tea concealing, relics. Then the glove, blood painted, not shed. Now stationery from Mayfair and a queen blinded. Our adversary is a showman. Every clue is a curtain drawn aside to reveal another curtain. But curtains have hems, and hems leave threads." At Blackfriars, we dismissed the cab. The tide was out. The river had retreated, exposing a wide causeway of mud and refuse. Gulls wheeled overhead, screaming like lost children. Holmes led the way down a flight of stone steps, slippery with weed. At the foot, he produced the luminous solution again and daubed it on the wall. Words appeared, faint but legible. "Beneath the 3rd arch, count 7 paces east, dig." We counted arches, paced, and dug with our walking sticks. 6 inches down, my ferrule struck metal. We unearthed a tobacco tin sealed with wax. Inside lay a brass key and a scrap of vellum inscribed with alchemical symbols. The sun, the moon, a serpent devouring its tail. Holmes turned the key in the lamplight. Yale lock, American pattern, newly cut. And the vellum, parchment from a 14th century missal stolen from the British Museum last Michaelmas. Our monk is no monk. A police whistle shrilled behind us. 2 constables pounded down the steps, helmets gleaming. "Oi! You there! Desist that digging!" Holmes pocketed tin and key with the speed of a conjurer. We scrambled up the opposite stairs and lost ourselves in the labyrinth of Fleet Street before the whistle sounded again. Back at Baker Street, the fire had burned low. Holmes threw on coal, then spread our finds across the table. Envelope, queen of spades, key, vellum, a pinch of glowing powder and a twist of paper. "Watson," he said, "we are invited to a midnight mass where the sacrament is truth and the wine is fear. The third arch, the seventh pace, the blinded queen. These are stations of a private passion play. Someone wishes us to believe Hargrove betrayed a brotherhood. The powder is the host, the darkness, the chalice." He took down his Persian slipper, filled his oldest clay, and paced until the carpet wore thin. "At 1 bell after matins, 4:30 in the morning, we present ourselves at the door this key opens. Until then, we watch." He drew the blinds, lit a single gas jet turned low, and stationed himself at the window. I loaded my revolver, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, and took the opposite chair. The clock on the mantel ticked with the solemnity of a death watch beetle. Outside, the fog pressed against the panes like a living thing. At 3 o'clock, the silence was shattered by a muffled thud against the door. Holmes glided across the room and opened it a crack. On the mat lay a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. He brought it in, unwrapped it beneath the lamp. A child's guy, a miniature effigy of a man in top hat and ulster, face stitched from white linen. Across the breast was pinned a label, R. Hargrove. From the mouth protruded a spill of green fire that burned without, heat spelling in midair the words, "The darkness is merciful, it hides the traitor's face." The flames guttered, died, and left only ash. Holmes brushed it from his fingers as though it were poison. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we descend into the undercroft of London. Bring the bull's-eye lantern, Watson, and your service revolver fully loaded. For the first time in my career, I believe we are hunting a man who can make the very darkness speak." He did not sleep. I dozed fitfully, dreaming of blinded queens and rivers of liquid emerald. When the clock struck 4, Holmes touched my shoulder. "The bell tolls, Doctor. Let us go to matins." We stepped out into a city that had forgotten the sun. Somewhere beneath our feet a key waited, and beyond the key a door, and beyond the door a revelation that would either save Reginald Hargrove or damn him forever. But that is the burden of the next chapter. For now the fog has swallowed us, the luminous words have faded, and the only light we carry is the cold green spark in Sherlock Holmes's eyes. Chapter 4. Whispers from the Docklands. Holmes decided that the key and the blinded queen must wait until we had sounded the river's underworld. "Paper trails end in Mayfair, Watson," he said, tossing me a rough pea jacket and a sou'wester. "But living tongues are looser where gin is cheap and the police lamps burn blue." Thus, at 2 in the morning of the 24th, we left Baker Street disguised as a pair of broken-down Lascars returned from a Calcutta voyage. Holmes's lean face was stained walnut with theatrical juice. A patch hid one eye. His gait had the roll of a man who has spent 40 years before the mast. I, bearded with spirit gum and smelling of Stockholm tar, limped on a crutch that concealed a sword stick. Even Lestrade would have passed us in the fog. We took the district railway to Stepney, then walked the last mile under the railway arches where the snow lay black with soot. The tide was ebbing. The foreshore stank of mud and decay. Every 20 yards a blue lamp glimmered above a tavern door. The Grapes, the town of Ramsgate, the Angel, names that promised warmth and delivered oblivion. Holmes steered me into the narrowest alley of all, a slit called Tiger Bay, where the houses leaned together until their eaves kissed and the stars were shut out. At the far end, a red lantern swung above a cellar hatch. A Chinaman in embroidered skull cap lifted the trap for a consideration of 6pence. We descended a ladder into a cavern lit by a single oil lamp and thick with the sweet, sick smell of opium. Mattresses of plaited bamboo lined the walls. On them lay sailors of every flag, Lascars, Kanakas, Norwegians, Greeks, their pipes bubbling like tiny volcanoes. The air was blue and humming, as though a hive of bees had been smoked into torpor. Holmes threaded between the bunks until he found the man he sought. A withered Malay with a face the color of teak and eyes filmed by cataract. He wore a sarong once scarlet, now the shade of dried blood. Holmes crouched, produced a Krugerrand from his ear like a conjurer, and let it ring on the floor. "Apa kabar, Tuan Kapitine," he murmured in flawless Malay. "We seek the ship that sails only when the moon is dark." The old man's lips parted in a toothless grin. He took the coin, bit it, and began to speak in the soft, sibilant tongue of the Straits. Holmes listened, head bowed, then translated in a whisper. 3 nights ago, a black schooner lay off Shadwell Basin. No lights, no name on the stern. A white man was carried aboard, bound, gagged but alive. The crew wore masks of black silk. They spoke of the winter darkness and the serum that unmasks the soul. The schooner vanished with the ebb, yet every night since a boat returns to the same stair and leaves a green light burning on the lowest step. I felt the chill of the river creep up my spine. "Hargrove?" "Alive," Holmes answered, "and bait." He pressed another coin into the Malay's palm and we climbed back into the fog. The red lantern had been extinguished. The alley was empty save for a starving cat that spat at us from a dustbin. Holmes led the way to Shadwell Basin, a square of black water hemmed by warehouses. The tide had left a wide beach of mud glistening like wet slate. A flight of stone steps descended from the quay. On the 7th tread, a tin cup held a pinch of the luminous powder, glowing softly, a corpse light in miniature. Holmes knelt, touched the glow, and sniffed his finger. Freshly placed within the hour. We are expected. He drew the brass key from his pocket. It caught the green light and threw it back like a cat's eye. At the foot of the steps, a rusted iron door was set into the quay wall. The lock was new, Yale patent, gleaming. Holmes inserted the key. It turned with a soft click. The door swung inward on oiled hinges, revealing a tunnel vaulted in brick and dripping with river ooze. We entered single file, Holmes first with the bullseye lantern shuttered to a slit. The air was warmer here, tainted with coal tar and something sharper. Carbolic, perhaps, or ether. Our footsteps echoed. Water dripped in a steady heartbeat. After 50 paces, the tunnel widened into a chamber the size of a small church crypt. Iron pillars supported the roof. Between them hung cages of bamboo such as are used for fighting quails. In each cage lay a man, alive but only just. Their eyes were open, fixed, reflecting the lantern like coins at the bottom of a well. Holmes moved among them, murmuring, "Opium? No, pupils normal. Chloral, pulse steady. Ah!" He lifted one man's eyelid with a thumb. "Mydriasis without injection marks. They have been dosed by inhalation." A groan came from the furthest cage. I swung the lantern. Reginald Hargrove lay there, wrists bound with silk cord, a gag of his, own cravat between his teeth. His face was gaunt, the scar livid against the pallor, but the eyes were clear and recognizably human. Holmes cut the cords with his pocket knife. Hargrove spat out the gag and croaked, "Holmes, thank God. They mean to make me confess before the solstice." "Confess what?" I demanded, chafing his wrists. He laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "That I stole the darkness itself." Before he could say more, a bell tolled overhead. 4 slow strokes muffled by brick and river. Holmes's head snapped up. "The signal! They are coming!" He dragged Hargrove to his feet. The tea merchant swayed, then steadied. "There is a door behind the pillar. Leads to the old monastery crypt. That is where they keep the serum." We stumbled across the chamber. Behind the central pillar, a second iron door stood ajar. Beyond it, stone steps spiraled downward, worn hollow by monastic sandals 7 centuries ago. The air grew warmer still, scented with incense and something metallic. Halfway down, the walls were lit by niches holding oil lamps of colored glass, crimson, violet, corpse green. At the foot, the tunnel opened into a vaulted cellar that had once been the chapter house of the Blackfriars. The ribs of the roof disappeared into shadow. The floor was paved with tombstones, their inscriptions half effaced. In the center stood a table of carved oak, and upon it a crystal retort connected by glass tubes to a copper bowl. A liquid the color of absinthe seethed gently, throwing off spirals of vapor that glowed with their own light. Around the table stood 5 figures robed in black, faces hidden by silk masks painted with the crescent eye. One held a silver chalice, another a stoppered phial of the luminous powder. Holmes stepped into the lamplight, revolver steady. "Gentlemen of the Order of the Eternal Eclipse, the game is up." The tallest masked figure inclined his head. The voice that emerged was cultured, amused, and utterly familiar. "On the contrary, Mr. Holmes, the game is just beginning. You have brought us the final ingredient." He raised the chalice. From the shadows behind him stepped Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, cloak discarded, hair unbound, eyes shining with the same green fire that lit the retort. "Eleanor?" Hargrove gasped. She smiled, and it was not the smile of the distraught wife who had wept in Baker Street. "Welcome to the winter darkness, my love," she said. "Tonight you will drink the serum and reveal the traitor in your soul, and Mr. Holmes—" Her gaze flicked to the revolver. "We'll watch." The masks closed in. The lamps flared. Somewhere above, the Thames lapped against the quay, patient as time. But that revelation and the fight that lit the crypt with pistol fire and liquid emerald belongs to the next chapter. For now, the darkness pressed close. The serum bubbled, and Sherlock Holmes, cornered for the first time in my memory, smiled the thin, dangerous smile of a man who has just seen the last card turn in his favor. Chapter 5. A False Trail in Mayfair. The moment Mrs. Hargrove's smile turned the crypt green, Holmes moved faster than thought. His left hand flicked the revolver skyward. The bullet shattered the violet lamp above the retort. Glass rained like icy hail. The emerald vapor billowed, blinding the masked circle. In the same heartbeat, his right arm hooked Hargrove round the waist and hurled him bodily toward the spiral stair. I fired twice into the ceiling. Plaster snowed down. The masks coughed and staggered, and we were running. 3 men in a chain. Holmes, Hargrove, myself, boots skidding on centuries of monkish dust. Behind us, the vapor coalesced into a single luminous arrow pointing upward as though the darkness itself were guiding pursuit. We took the stairs 3 at a time. The iron door at the top still stood open. River fog poured in, thick as wool. We burst onto the Shadwell mud just as the tide, treacherous as a pickpocket, licked the lowest step. A boat waited, black-painted, 6 oars muffled in sacking. The oarsmen wore the same silk masks. A green lantern swung at the prow. Holmes shoved Hargrove into the mud. "Down! Crawl beneath the quay!" We slithered under the timber staging, barnacles rasping our cheeks while the boat grounded above us. Boots thumped overhead. Voices hissed in Hindustani. Then silence, broken only by the slap of water and the distant clang of a bellbuoy. After 5 endless minutes, the boat pushed off. The green lantern dwindled, swallowed by fog. We crawled out coated in Thames mud and shivering like terriers. Hargrove's teeth chattered so violently I feared lockjaw. Holmes stripped off his pea jacket and flung it round the tea merchant's shoulders. "Quick march, gentlemen. The game has moved to Mayfair, and Mayfair keeps late hours." We found a Nighthawk cab at Wapping Stairs and clattered westward, the horse slipping on frozen cobbles. Holmes spoke in clipped sentences while Hargrove gulped brandy from my flask. The serum is a refined phosphorescent alkaloid, part luciferin, part scopolamine. Inhaled, it induces total recall. Imbibed, it strips away every lie a man has ever told himself. They mean to dose me at the solstice eclipse tomorrow night, when the moon is darkest and the mind most vulnerable. The order believes the serum will reveal the location of the original Calcutta formula, which he laughed bitterly, memorized and burned. And your wife? I demanded. Eleanor was never my wife. She is the order's high augur, born Eleanor de Lacy, daughter of a mad alchemist. Our marriage was the bait, my disappearance the hook. The woman who wept in Baker Street was an understudy, superb, but the limp was painted on. Holmes's eyes glittered. A pretty comedy, Watson. Now for the tragedy. We left Hargrove at the Charing, Cross Hospital, under the care of my old dresser, Stamford, with instructions to admit no visitor without the password Darjeeling. Then Holmes and I changed cabs thrice, doubled back through Covent Garden's sleeping market, and finally alighted in Berkeley Square at 5:30. The snow had begun again, soft and pitiless. Number 9 Chapel Court was shuttered, but a chink of light showed beneath the stationer's door. Holmes rapped the private signal, shave and a haircut. Lefebvre opened instantly, nightcap askew, eyes wide. They came for the second envelope, he whispered. Masked, armed. I gave them the decoy. The real one is here. He pressed a wafer-thin packet into Holmes's hand. God go with you, monsieur. Inside the packet, a single sheet of vellum, the blinded queen now restored, her eyes painted with the luminous powder so that they glowed like twin emeralds. Beneath, in Eleanor's own hand, Hyde Park, the frozen serpentine. Midnight. Bring the doctor. Leave the detective at home or the tea merchant drowns in winter fire. Holmes laughed aloud, a sound like ice cracking. They still believe I can be separated from my Boswell. Come, Watson, boots and revolver. We reached the park as the clock struck 11. The snow had covered every path. The serpentine lay black and still, a mirror for the gas lamps along the Bayswater Road. A solitary hansom waited beneath the plane trees, its horse-blanketed driver asleep on the box. Holmes approached, tapped the wheel with his stick. Drive on, my man. Your fare is discharged. The driver woke with a snort, saw the glint of half a crown, and whipped up without a word. Holmes opened the door. Inside on the seat lay a lady's muff of white ermine. From it protruded the corner of a carte de visite. Holmes lifted it to the nearest lamp. The photograph showed Mrs. Hargrove, no, Eleanor de Lacy, standing beside a marble sundial in some tropical garden. On the reverse in green ink, follow the shadow when the shadow is shortest. Dig where the gnomon points at noon. Holmes glanced at the sky. Dawn in 90 minutes. The solstice sun rises at 8:03. We have time. We tramped the length of the serpentine, boots crunching virgin snow. At the eastern end stood the marble sundial, a relic of the 1851 exhibition, its bronze gnomon thick with frost. Holmes brushed it clear, then produced a pocket compass. At winter solstice, the sun rises due southeast. When the shadow is shortest, local noon, it will lie due north. Mark the spot. We paced north from the plinth, counting 23 yards. Holmes's stride measured to the inch. There we dug with our walking sticks and bare hands until metal rang. A shallow iron box padlocked, the lock new and bright. The Yale key from Blackfriars fitted perfectly. Inside, a bundle of forged letters on Hargrove and Sons letterhead, each confessing to smuggling opium in tea chests, each dated last Michaelmas and signed in a trembling hand. A second bundle implicated Holmes himself in the theft of the British Museum vellum. At the bottom lay a single sheet headed Confession of Sherlock Holmes, already typed, awaiting only a signature. I stared, aghast. Blackmail. Child's play, Holmes said, pocketing the letters. Planted to discredit us both. Observe the soil, dark loam from a Chelsea hothouse, not Hyde Park clay. Transported tonight in the muff. Eleanor's scent still clings, jasmine and belladonna. He scattered the forged letters to the wind. They fluttered across the ice like white moths. Then he drew a police whistle and blew 3 shrill blasts. From the Knightsbridge gate, a bull's-eye lantern bobbed in answer. Inspector Lestrade, muffled in ulster and indignation, stomped toward us with 2 constables. "Mr. Holmes, at this hour, the commissioner—" "Will thank you tomorrow," Holmes interrupted. "Arrest the occupants of number 47, Grosvenor Square, Sir Edmund Blackwood's residence. Charge, conspiracy to administer a noxious substance. Evidence, these." He handed over the iron box. "And send a man to Charing Cross Hospital, guard room 12, patient Hargrove." Lestrade opened his mouth, closed it, touched his helmet, and marched off, the constables trailing like obedient hounds. Holmes watched them go, then turned to me, eyes alight with wintry fire. "Watson, they believe the serum is still in Hargrove's head. They believe I will come alone to the eclipse. They have laid a false trail from dock to park, from crypt to Mayfair drawing room. But every trail has a beginning, and theirs began in a laboratory beneath the city. Tonight we follow the scent back to its lair, before the moon dies and the darkness drinks us all." He struck off across the snow, coattails snapping like a banner. I followed, revolver heavy, heart heavier. Behind us, the forged confessions melted into the ice, and the sundial's shadow crept toward noon that would never come. The eclipse was 24 hours away. Somewhere beneath London, a retort still bubbled, and a woman who had never been a wife waited with a chalice of liquid truth. But that descent, and the fight among the glowing skeletons of alchemists long dead, is the burden of the next chapter. For now the snow fell thicker, the lamps grew dim, and Sherlock Holmes, smiling his dangerous smile, led us toward the one place in London where winter darkness was brewed and bottled. Chapter 6. The Hidden Laboratory. We left Hyde Park with the forged letters fluttering behind us like a flight of guilty ghosts, and the sky already paling toward a sun that would rise blood-red. Holmes's stride was that of a man who has just heard the starter's pistol. He spoke only once over his shoulder as we plunged into the maze of alleys behind the Bank of England. "Watson, the order needs 3 things before moondark: the formula in Hargrove's skull, the serum in their retort, and a theater where the eclipse will be absolute. London's sewers run beneath every street. Beneath the sewers run the lost rivers, Fleet, Tyburn, Westbourne. Beneath those the Romans left hippocausts, and beneath those the Templars left chapter houses. Eleanor has chosen the oldest darkness in the city. We are going down." He stopped at a coal hole in Threadneedle Street, lifted the iron cover with a jemmy borrowed from Lestrade's constable, and vanished. I followed, revolver first, into a shaft that smelled of centuries of soot and river mud. 20 feet down, we struck a brick tunnel where the air was warm and humming. A single green lamp, our own luminous powder in a bullseye, swung from Holmes's belt, painting the walls the color of absinthe. The tunnel narrowed, then widened into a vaulted corridor paved with Roman tesserae. Black and white dolphins leaping through invisible waves. Every 10 yards an alcove held a lead cistern stamped with the Templar cross. Holmes ran his fingers along the brickwork until he found a keystone carved with the eye and moon. He pressed. The wall swung inward on counterweights, exhaling a breath of frankincense and ether. We stepped into a laboratory that would have made Paracelsus weep with envy. Imagine, listener, a cavern 30 feet high, rib-vaulted like Westminster Chapter House, lit by 33 argon lamps whose filaments glowed the exact green of deep ocean. Copper retorts the size of handsome wheels bubbled on spirit stoves. Glass tubes coiled like serpents carrying liquid starlight from flask to flask. Along the walls stood shelves of stoppered jars labeled in Latin and Sanskrit, Luciferin Equorius, Scopula Mortis, Nox Veritatis. In the center rose an operating table of black marble, its gutters stained emerald. Above it hung a crystal sphere filled with the serum, suspended by silver chains from a zodiac painted on the ceiling. When the moon reached the serpent's mouth, 3 hours hence, the sphere would tip, the serum would fall, and the eclipse would be drunk. 5 figures in crimson robes turned as one. Their masks were beaten gold, featureless save for the crescent eye. The tallest, Eleanor de Lacy, lifted a hand gloved in white kid. "Welcome, gentlemen, you are precisely on time." Holmes bowed with mocking grace. "Augur de Lacy, or should I say Sister Nightshade, your laboratory is admirable, but your security lamentable. 1 Yale lock, 1 counterweight, child's play." Eleanor's laugh echoed like glass beads poured down stone stairs. "Security is for banks, Mr. Holmes. Faith is for laboratories. My acolytes believe the darkness itself guards us, and so it does." She clapped twice. From the shadows stepped Jenkins the foreman, no longer limping, a Webley revolver steady in his great fist. Beside him, the false Mrs. Hargrove, now revealed as a doe-eyed actress named Miss Violet Verney, held a hypodermic filled with glowing fluid. Holmes's eyes flicked to the zodiac. "The sphere drops at 7:11. We have 2 hours and 53 minutes to disappoint you." 2 hours, Eleanor corrected, and 52. "Bring the tea merchant." Jenkins shoved forward a wheeled chair. In it sat Reginald Hargrove, wrists strapped, eyes wide and glassy. A rubber tube ran from his arm to a drip flask of serum. Already his lips moved, reciting figures, dates, sins. "He has had the primer," Eleanor said. "At moon dark he drinks the chalice and speaks the formula aloud. You, Mr. Holmes, will write it down. Dr. Watson will witness. Then you both join our little congregation, forever." I raised my revolver. Jenkins's Webley answered. Stalemate. Holmes strolled to a retort, lifted a beaker, and sniffed. "Refined from the sea-fire jellyfish of the Andaman Trench, yes? Combined with tincture of deadly nightshade and a catalyst of radium bromide. Brilliant but unstable. A temperature rise of 3 degrees and the whole cavern becomes a green inferno." He turned a stopcock. Steam hissed. The argon lamps flickered. Eleanor's golden mask betrayed nothing, but her fingers tightened on the chalice. "Watson," Holmes said conversationally, "do you recall the ventilation shaft above the operating table? Roman, circular, 2 feet diameter, runs straight to the street grating outside the bank. A child could climb it. I saw it then, a black circle in the vault, almost invisible against the zodiac. A rope ladder hung just out of reach. Holmes moved. He hurled the beaker at Jenkins. The foreman ducked. The glass shattered against a pillar, spraying luminous acid. Violet Verney screamed as it ate through her sleeve. I fired once, high, to shatter the crystal sphere. The shot rang like a cathedral bell. The sphere cracked, serum dripping in slow, deadly pearls. Chaos blossomed. Eleanor lunged for the chalice. Holmes met her, caught her wrist, and twisted. The golden mask flew off, revealing a face beautiful and terrible, eyes burning with fanatic fire. Jenkins swung his revolver. I parried with the sword stick, steel ringing on steel. Hargrove, forgotten, rocked his chair until it toppled. The drip tube tore free, serum splashing across the tesserae where it ignited in cold green flame. Holmes dragged Eleanor toward the rope ladder. "Up, Watson! Take Hargrove!" I heaved the tea merchant over my shoulder. He weighed no more than a child in his drugged state, and climbed, boots slipping on rope rungs slick with river ooze. Behind us, the laboratory roared into life, retorts exploding, argon lamps bursting in emerald stars. The acolytes tore off their masks, faces blistered by acid vapor. Jenkins fired wildly. Bullets ricocheted from the vault like angry hornets. Holmes was last. He paused on the ladder, drew a phosphorus match from his waistcoat, and struck it on the stone. The flame, ordinary, honest yellow, touched a trailing tube of ether. A blue flare raced along the floor, met the spilled serum, and leapt upward in a pillar of verdigris fire. "Exit," he said calmly, "pursued by bear." We burst through the grating into Threadneedle Street as the clock struck 6. Dawn was a thin red wound on the horizon. The Bank of England loomed above us like a sleeping titan. Behind, muffled by stone, came a subterranean thunder. Manhole covers danced. A geyser of green steam shot 20 feet into the air, smelling of salt and brimstone. Passers-by scattered, shouting of gas explosions and Judgment Day. Holmes brushed soot from his ulster. The formula is safe, locked in a mind now too addled to speak it. The serum is destroyed. The order is scattered. Yet one thread remains. He pointed to the pavement. In the soot, a single kid glove lay, monogrammed EDL. From its finger protruded a card. The Queen of Spades, eyes restored, mouth smiling. On the reverse, in luminous ink already fading, "The eclipse is portable, Mr. Holmes. Bring the doctor to the roof of St. Paul's at moon dark. Come alone, or London drinks the darkness." Holmes crushed the card in his fist. "She has a second laboratory, mobile, alchemical, strapped to her back like a papist's reliquary. The eclipse will be witnessed from the Golden Gallery 400 feet above the city. At 7:11 the moon dies, the sphere tips, and every soul in the whispered distance of St. Paul's hears the truth it was never meant to hear." He looked up at the cathedral's dome, black against the rising sun. "We have 1 hour to climb 434 steps, Watson, after you." I followed, lungs already burning, revolver heavy, heart heavier. Behind us, the hidden laboratory smoldered like a dragon's grave. Ahead, the bells of St. Paul's began to toll the 3/4, each stroke a hammer on the anvil of the coming night. But the climb, the duel on the whispering gallery, and the final revelation beneath the dying moon, that is the burden of the next chapter. For now the snow has turned to sleet, the green fire is quenched, and Sherlock Holmes is running upward into a darkness that only he can read. Chapter 7. Betrayal in the Snow. We climbed St. Paul's as the city below prepared for apocalypse. The great west doors were locked, but Holmes had foreseen that. A verger's key, borrowed from the dean's pocket at evensong and returned before the final amen, opened the south transept. We slipped inside, 3 shadows against Wren's pale stone. Holmes, myself, and Reginald Hargrove half carried between us, pupils still pinpricks from the primer dose. The nave was empty save for the echo of our boots and the faint smell of yesterday's incense. Gas jets hissed along the aisles. The dome above us was a cavern of darkness pricked by a single red spark. The warning lamp on the Golden Gallery. Holmes paused beneath the whispering dish. 434 steps, Watson. 30 seconds per flight, 5 breaths between. At the top we shall need lungs of brass and nerves of ice. He spoke lightly, but I saw the pulse beat at his temple. For the first time in our friendship, he carried no plan beyond the next footfall. We began the ascent. The stone spiral is a helix of penance, narrow, worn, lit only by the green glow of Holmes's pocket torch. Up, past the library gallery where the dust of centuries sleeps on chained folios. Up, past the geometric staircase where the treads project like the teeth of a stone shark. Up, until the air thinned and the wind found us through arrow slits no wider than a prayer book. Hargrove stumbled. I caught him. His breath smelled of belladonna and fear. "Leave me," he rasped. "I am the bait. She wants only the formula." Holmes's answer was to hoist the tea merchant across his shoulders like a rolled carpet. "Bait is useless without the hook, Hargrove. Keep your secrets. I intend to keep my friend." At the 300th step, the staircase opened into the whispering gallery. Moonlight poured through the clear-story windows, silvering the mosaic prophets. The dome curved above us like the inside of a huge white egg. A single rope ladder, silk black, knotted every foot, hung from the lantern gallery 200 feet higher. It swayed gently, though no wind reached it. Holmes tested the lowest rung. "Silk can bear 300 weight. We climb in tandem." We ascended hand over hand, knees gripping, the city falling away beneath us. London spread like a map of dying embers. The Thames a black ribbon, bridges strung with fairy lamps, snow swirling in spirals above the river. Big Ben struck 7, 1 hour to eclipse. The Golden Gallery is a narrow balcony circling the base of the lantern. We rolled over the balustrade, gasping, frost feathering our eyelashes. The wind here was a knife. It sang through the iron railings and tore at our coats. In the center of the gallery stood Eleanor de Lacy. She had shed the crimson robe for a gown of midnight velvet, high-collared, close-fitting, the skirt slit for movement. Across her back hung a crystal sphere no larger than a coconut, suspended in a cage of silver filigree. Tubes ran from it to a mouthpiece of black rubber. A single green droplet trembled at the nozzle. Her hair was unbound, whipping like a battle standard. In her right hand she held a Webley revolver. In her left, a stopwatch. "Punctual," she said. "I admire punctuality." Holmes set Hargrove on his feet. The tea merchant swayed but stood. "Eleanor," he croaked, "this is madness. The serum will kill half the city." "Only the guilty?" she replied. "The innocent have nothing to confess." She tapped the sphere. "One breath at moon dark, and every soul within the sound of these bells will speak their blackest truth." Imagine Reginald, MPs confessing bribes in the strangers' gallery, bankers admitting fraud in the Royal Exchange, lovers betraying lovers in every attic from Limehouse to Mayfair. London will be born again in one glorious scream of honesty. Holmes stepped forward. "And you, Augur? What truth will the darkness drag from your throat?" She smiled, and the wind carried it away. "That I loved you once, Reginald, before you chose empire over enlightenment. That I forged our marriage lines in a Calcutta registry to keep you close. That every tear I shed in Baker Street was real. Real regret for the man I must destroy." Hargrove lunged. Holmes caught him as he fell, weeping like a child. Eleanor raised the revolver. "The formula, Mr. Holmes, write it on the stone with this chalk. Then step back." She tossed a stump of green chalk. It rang on the iron grating. Holmes caught it, but did not kneel. "You mistake me for a man who bargains with lunatics." He hurled the chalk over the balustrade. It spun downward, a tiny comet, and vanished. Eleanor sighed. "Then we do it the hard way." She pressed the stopwatch. A bell rang inside the lantern, clear, chilling, the solstice bell. The moon, visible through the open fretwork above us, was already nibbled at one edge. Eclipse had begun. Jenkins rose from behind the stone drum, alive, face blistered but grinning, a second revolver leveled. Violet Verney appeared on the opposite side, a stiletto gleaming. 3 guns, 1 ladder, 400 feet of night. Holmes's eyes flicked to the great copper ball atop the lantern. It was suspended by a single chain, swaying in the gale. A maintenance cradle, wooden rope suspended, hung beside it. "Watson," he said conversationally, "do you still carry the flask?" I knew which one. The brandy flask, half full, pewter, dented at balaclava. I drew it. Phosphorus, Holmes murmured. A souvenir from the laboratory. Throw it at Jenkins's feet when I give the word. Eleanor began to count. 10 seconds to totality. 9. Jenkins advanced. Violet circled. Hargrove sank to his knees, muttering numbers, parts of the formula leaking through the primer. 8. 7. Holmes edged sideways, coat flapping like a sail. I palmed the flask. 6. 5. The moon was a black coin rimmed with fire. The city below vanished. Only the dome lamps and the green droplet in Eleanor's sphere gave light. 4. Holmes shouted, "Now, Watson!" I hurled the flask. It struck the grating, burst, and white fire blossomed. Phosphorus, pure and searing. Jenkins screamed, revolver waving. Violet stumbled blind. Holmes sprang, caught the cradle rope, and swung out over the abyss, boots skimming the void. Eleanor fired. The bullet sparked off the copper ball. Holmes kicked the chain. The great orb, 2 tons of verdigris metal, swayed, groaned, and tore free. It fell like God's own hammer. Jenkins looked up too late. The ball struck the gallery, punched through iron and stone, and carried him downward in a thunder of shattered balustrade. Violet shrieked and followed, vanishing into the dark. Eleanor alone stood untouched, sphere glowing brighter as the eclipse reached totality. She lifted the mouthpiece. Holmes dropped from the cradle, landed cat-light, and drove his shoulder into her midriff. They fell together, rolling toward the broken edge. The sphere tore loose, spun across the grating, and lodged against a stanchion, 1 breath from tipping. I lunged for Hargrove, dragged him clear. Below, the copper ball crashed through the stone gallery, through the whispering gallery, through the library floor, and finally struck the nave pavement with a clang that shivered every pane in the cathedral. Dust billowed upward like a genie released. On the golden gallery, Holmes and Eleanor fought in silence. She was strong, years of yoga and fanatic will, but Holmes fought with the cold precision of a surgeon. He pinned her wrist, forced the revolver toward the sky. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. "Yield," he panted. "Never!" she spat, and bit his hand to the bone. Blood spattered the snow. Holmes recoiled. Eleanor rolled free, snatched the sphere, and jammed the mouthpiece between her teeth. The green droplet trembled on the edge of falling. Holmes looked straight at me across the ruined gallery. In that instant, I understood. I raised my revolver, not at Eleanor, but at the silver cage itself. "Forgive me," I whispered and fired. The bullet shattered the crystal. Serum exploded outward in a mist of liquid emerald. Eleanor inhaled once, deep, involuntary, and her eyes rolled back. She staggered, arms windmilling, and toppled over the broken balustrade. For a heartbeat, she hung in the air, velvet gown billowing like black wings. Then she fell 400 feet, trailing green fire that lit the falling snow like a comet's tail. She struck the nave pavement beside the copper ball and lay still, a dark star on white marble. The eclipse ended. The moon emerged whole and cold. London stirred below, unaware it had been 1 breath from confession. Holmes slumped against the lantern, hand bleeding, face gray. Hargrove crawled to the edge and vomited into the abyss. I tore my scarf, bound Holmes's wound. "It's over." He shook his head. "It is never over, Watson, only postponed. The formula is still in his head. The order is scattered, but roots remain." He looked down at Eleanor's body, tiny now, arms spread like a broken crucifix. "She was magnificent," he said softly. "Wrong, but magnificent." The great bell tolled 8. Dawn was a promise on the horizon. We descended slowly, 3 men bound by ropes of gilt and phosphor burns. Behind us, the golden gallery smoked gently, snow hissing where green fire touched it. At the transept door, Inspector Lestrade waited with a dozen constables and a warrant. He took one look at our faces and snapped the handcuffs shut on empty air. "Another explosion, Mr. Holmes?" "Another revelation, Inspector." The darkness has spoken, and London slept through it. We stepped into the snowy morning. The city was white and innocent again. Somewhere a muffin man rang his bell. A crossing sweeper whistled, "God rest ye merry." Only the green stains on the cathedral pavement and the blood on Holmes's hand bore witness to the night. But the final unmasking, Hargrove's secret, the true origin of the winter fire and the price of truth, waits in the quiet glow of 221B. That is the burden of the next chapter. For now the snow falls soft as forgiveness, and Sherlock Holmes limps toward breakfast with the taste of betrayal still metallic on his tongue. Chapter 8. The Phantom's Pursuit. The copper ball had scarcely stopped rolling in the nave when the cathedral itself began to speak. A low rumble, felt in the marrow rather than heard, rose through the marble. Dust sifted from the dome like golden flour. The great organ gave one involuntary moan, as though a giant hand had swept every key at once. Then the lanterns on the golden gallery exploded in sequence. Pop, 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 showering the snow below with emerald sparks. Holmes's face, lit by the falling fire, was the color of old parchment. "Aftershock," he snapped. "The serum vapor has found the gas mains. Run!" We ran. Down the south transept stair, 4 steps at a stride, past vergers shouting in the gloom, past Lestrade bellowing orders no one heeded. The west doors stood open, snow whirled in on a wind that smelled of phosphorus and scorched velvet. We burst into Ludgate Hill as the first tongue of green flame licked from a manhole. It reared 20 feet, hissed, and began to move. Sliding along the gutter like a living thing following the slope toward the river. Holmes seized my arm. "The Fleet ditch. The vapor is heavier than air. It will follow every sewer to the Thames. If it reaches the gasometers at Beckton—" He did not finish. A cab horse screamed, reared, and bolted past us, dragging its shattered shafts. Behind it, the green fire poured into Fleet Street, igniting tar barrels, shop awnings, the very snow itself. People fled in every direction, top hats bowling like 9-pins, a bishop in gaiters clutching the host in a silver pyx, a flower girl scattering violets that blazed as they fell. Holmes vaulted onto a brewer's dray, thundering downhill. I followed, Hargrove between us like a sack of Assam. The driver lashed his team, sparks flew from iron rims. We careered past Temple Bar as the fire serpent rounded the corner, taller now. Crowned with black smoke, windows burst in its wake, a constable's helmet melted like wax. "Blackfriars Bridge!" Holmes roared in the driver's ear. "A sovereign if we beat the flame!" The man needed no urging. We thundered, onto the bridge as the fire reached the embankment. Below us the Thames lay black and sullen, patched with ice. The green serpent hissed, tasted the water, and recoiled, then divided, flowing along both parapets like twin rivers of witchlight. Holmes stood on the box, coat whipping. The tide is ebbing. The vapor will ride the mudflats to the Isle of Dogs. There the gasometers stand, 12 million cubic feet, one spark. He leapt from the dray, dragged Hargrove after him. I followed, boots skidding on frost. Halfway across the bridge, a hansom slewed sideways, blocking our path. Its door flew open and a figure in charred velvet staggered out. Eleanor de Lacy, alive, hair singed to stubble, face blistered but eyes blazing with the same fanatic fire. She carried the broken silver cage strapped to her chest like a papoose. From its ruptured sphere, a steady stream of serum dripped, igniting where it touched the snow. In her right hand, she clutched a flare pistol loaded with magnesium. "Too late, Mr. Holmes," she screamed above the wind. "The eclipse is in my blood now. One flare into the gasometers and London confesses from Westminster to Wapping." She leveled the pistol at the sky. Holmes moved first. He snatched the silver pyx from the fleeing bishop, still running past us, and hurled it like a cricket ball. The sacred vessel struck Eleanor's wrist. The flare pistol spun away, clattered on the parapet, and hung teetering over the abyss. For one heartbeat, everything balanced. The woman, the pistol, the city. Then Eleanor lunged for the weapon. Holmes lunged for her. I lunged for Hargrove, who had begun reciting the formula aloud in a drugged monotone. Numbers, proportions, Sanskrit syllables, each word a spark. Eleanor's fingers closed on the flare pistol. Holmes's hand closed on her collar. They teetered together on the narrow parapet 400 feet above the ice-patched river. The green fire roared beneath them, licking at the ironwork. I saw Holmes's lips move. No sound reached me, but I read the words. "Forgive me." He twisted, using her own momentum, and flung her outward, not down, but across. She arced over the parapet, velvet gown billowing, and landed on the flat roof of a coal barge moored midstream. The impact shattered the remaining crystal. Serum sprayed in a luminous fan. The coal dust ignited instantly. The barge became a funeral pyre drifting downstream on the ebb. Eleanor rose once amid the flames, arms spread like a dark seraph. She opened her mouth. Whether to curse or confess, I shall never know. And the fire took her. The barge grounded against Blackfriars Pier, exploded in a geyser of green and gold, and sank, taking the last of the winter darkness with it. The flare pistol clattered to the bridge at my feet, spent. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of steam where fire met river. The green serpent guttered, divided, and died in 1,000 hissing snowflakes. London exhaled. Holmes stood at the parapet, staring down at the sinking pyre. Blood from his bitten hand dripped onto the frost, freezing as it fell. I touched his shoulder. "It is finished." He shook his head. "It is survived. There is a difference." Behind us, Hargrove had ceased reciting. He sat in the snow, rocking, tears cutting channels through the soot on his cheeks. "I remember everything," he whispered. "The formula, the betrayal, the child we buried in Calcutta. The darkness kept its promise." Holmes knelt, gentle as a father. "And now the light must keep its own. Come." We lifted him between us. The city was waking to a nightmare. Fire engines clanging, bells tolling from every steeple, headlines already forming in 1,000 frightened minds. Yet as we limped toward Fleet Street, the snow began again. Soft, pure, obliterating every green stain. A growler drawn by 2 exhausted horses rattled to a stop. The driver, face black with smoke, touched his whip to his forehead. "Baker Street, gents. On the house. London owes you." We climbed in. Holmes collapsed against the cushions, eyes closed. Hargrove slept instantly, head on my knee like a child. I watched the city slide past. Shopkeepers sweeping glass, constables directing traffic, a newsboy already shouting, "Mystery blast at St. Paul's, city saved by detective." Holmes spoke without opening his eyes. "Tomorrow the yard will claim a gas leak. Lestrade will be decorated. We shall be forgotten by luncheon." "Let them," I said. "We know what we know." He smiled then, the small, sad smile I have seen only twice before. Once after the Moor. Once after Reichenbach. "Watson," he murmured, "there are truths too bright for the printed page. This is one. Burn your notes. Let the winter darkness stay buried." The cab turned into Baker Street. Snow piled soft against the familiar blue door. Mrs. Hudson waited on the step, shawl over her nightgown, eyes wide. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, the whole dome glowing green. I thought the end had come." Holmes stepped down, swaying. "It very nearly did, dear lady. Cocoa for 3, if you please, and a drop of brandy in Mr. Hargrove's. The night has been revealing." We helped Hargrove inside. The sitting room fire roared welcome. The gas jets fluttered like captive butterflies. Holmes sank into his basket chair, hand cradled in a silk handkerchief already crimson. I poured brandy. Hargrove drank, shuddered, and slept again. Outside, the snow fell thicker, erasing footprints, scorch marks. the last green ember on the river. Holmes lifted his glass to the firelight. "To absent friends," he said softly, "and to truths that die with their keepers." We drank. The clock struck 9. Somewhere a muffin man rang his bell. Somewhere a church choir rehearsed "In the Bleak Midwinter." London, ignorant of its salvation, went about its ordinary miracles. I fetched my notebook, tore out every page of the chase and fed them to the flames. They curled, blackened, and were gone. Holmes watched the ashes rise. "One day, Watson, when we are old and the world is kinder, we may tell the tale. Until then—" He raised his glass again. "The darkness keeps its counsel, and so must we." He leaned back, eyes closing, the firelight gilding the hawk profile I have followed through 100 storms. Outside, the snow sealed London in white forgiveness. But the final deduction, the secret Hargrove whispered in his sleep, the true name of the winter fire and the price Holmes paid on the bridge, that waits for the quiet of Chapter 10 when the hearth is warm and the brandy is mellow and the city sleeps secure in its blanket of lies. For now the chase is ended, the phantom burned, and 3 battered souls sit by the fire while the snow whispers, "Hush." Chapter 9. Unraveling the Threads. We 3 sat in a triangle of lamplight, Holmes in the basket chair, left hand cradled in a bowl of iced brandy, Hargrove opposite, wrapped in my old regimental blanket, eyes clearer than they had been since Calcutta. I at the table, fountain pen poised above a fresh sheet of foolscap marked "Private, never for the Strand." Holmes began without preamble, voice low, almost drowsy. "Rule 1, gentlemen. Every illusion requires a screen. The winter darkness was never a potion. It was a confidence trick played upon the oldest fear of mankind, that we are not what we pretend. Begin with the screen." He lifted a finger. "Screen the first, the frost message on the bedroom pane. A simple projection, a magic lantern concealed in the ivy outside Cheney Walk, lens reversed, slide painted with the luminous powder dissolved in glycerin. Breath on the glass condensed the image. Sunrise erased it. Child's play for a woman who once staged table-rapping seances for the Duchess of Sutherland." Hargrove flinched. "Eleanor." "Precisely. Screen the second, the phantom ship. A derelict lighter towed by muffled oars, hull painted black. Green lamps swung on fishing rods. Sailors paid in gin and terror. The abduction occurred at low tide. Footprints led to the water because the water itself was the stage door." He sipped iced brandy, winced as the cut on his hand met the spirit. "Screen the third. The Order of the Eternal Eclipse, a music hall troupe. Jenkins the strong man, Violet the knife thrower, 3 acrobats from the Alhambra, and Eleanor the mesmerist. Their temple was a disused chapel in Shadwell. The robes came from Clarkson's theatrical costumiers. The masks were ordered from Paris by a Monsignor Nightshade who paid in crisp fivers." I set down my pen. "But the serum, men in cages, eyes fixed. Stage hypnosis amplified by a harmless tincture of Indian hemp and caffeine. The glowing retorts, colored water over argon bulbs. The explosion beneath the bank, a single canister of compressed hydrogen and a spark coil timed to the cathedral clock. Magnificent misdirection, Watson. We chased phantoms while the real crime walked unnoticed through the front door of 221B. Hargrove's voice cracked. The real crime? Holmes leaned forward until the lamplight carved his face into hawk and shadow. Tea, Mr. Hargrove. Nothing more exotic than tea. Your firm imported a chest of genuine Assam, yes, but inside every brick was sewn a thin sheet of radium-impregnated silk. The powder we saw glowing was the dust shaken loose in transit. The formula Eleanor hunted was the shipping schedule. Dates, tides, customs officers paid to look the other way. With it, she could have flooded Europe with enough radium to light every ballroom from here to St. Petersburg and poison a generation of duchesses who drank their Darjeeling too hot. He reached for the tin box we had dug from Hyde Park. Inside lay the forged letters, now revealed as palimpsests. The top sheet embezzlement, the undersheet, visible only under ultraviolet, micro-photographs of Lloyd's shipping manifests. Eleanor needed a respectable importer, Holmes continued. She chose you, courted you, married you in a sham ceremony witnessed by paid extras. When you discovered the radium bricks, you did the honorable thing. You burned the manifests and fled to confess to your wife. She, of course, staged your disappearance to force the confession on a larger stage. Hargrove buried his face in the blanket. I thought the powder was a curiosity, a gift for Eleanor's birthday. I opened one brick in the warehouse. Jenkins saw the glow reported to her. That night she wrote the frost message herself from the garden, laughing at how easily I frightened. Holmes's eyes softened a fraction. You were the only honest man in the play, Hargrove. That is why the serum terrified you. It promised to strip away the lies you never told. I poured cocoa, strong and sweet. Steam curled between us like incense. But the fall from St. Paul's, I said. No illusion there. Holmes flexed his bandaged hand. Eleanor's one miscalculation. She believed fanaticism could outrun physics. The copper ball was never meant to fall. It was ballast for the cradle. When Jenkins fired wild, the chain parted. Providence Watson wears a verger's gown and answers to the name of Dean Gregory. He rose, crossed to the chemical corner, and returned with a stoppered vial no longer than my thumb. Inside, a single drop of emerald liquid trembled. The last of the winter fire, distilled from the barge wreckage by a Thames waterman who thought it pretty, enough to make one man confess or blind him for life. I shall send it to Vienna. Professor Freud is curious about truth serums. Hargrove looked up, eyes red-rimmed. And me? You will sail on the P&O Corinthian tomorrow, noon, under the name Mr. Reginald Hope. Papers in the name of your late brother. A tea plantation in Ceylon awaits, legitimate this time. Your wife, your true wife, Eleanor Hargrove of Simla, died of fever in '83. The woman who wept on our rug was an impostor from the first embrace. He placed a railway ticket and a banker's draft on the table. £500. Plant Darjeeling, marry again, tell no one your story. The darkness has revealed all it needs to. Hargrove took the ticket with shaking fingers. You give me a second life. I give London a quiet morning, Holmes corrected. Go now. Mrs. Hudson has packed ham sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. The cab waits. The tea merchant stood, blanket slipping from his shoulders. At the door he paused. Mr. Holmes, will I dream of green fire? Only if you drink the Thames water, Holmes replied. Stick to tea. The door closed. Footsteps descended the 17 steps, faded into snow-muffled Baker Street. Silence settled, thick as wool. I corked my pen. And the moral, Holmes? He sank back, cradling the bandaged hand. That every winter darkness is man-made and every revelation costs someone their mask. Eleanor wanted a city naked. She forgot that nakedness is cold. Truth is a lantern, Watson, not a bonfire. He reached for his violin, drew the bow across the strings in a slow, mournful adagio, something between a lullaby and a dirge. Play me down, old friend, he murmured. Tomorrow the Yard will speak of gas leaks, the Bishop will speak of miracles, and the Strand will speak of nothing at all. Tonight we know what we know, and that is enough. I took the second fiddle from its case, my old army instrument, strings worn thin, and joined him. The notes rose, twined, filled the room with minor harmonies. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing footprints, sealing scars. At the final cadence, Holmes laid the violin across his knee. "One thread remains," he said softly. "The child you mentioned on the bridge, the one buried in Calcutta." Hargrove's confession, whispered in drugged sleep, had been brief. A daughter born 1880, dead of cholera within the year. Eleanor had insisted on a Hindu cremation, scattering the ashes in the Hooghly at dusk. The radium silk had been sewn into the funeral shroud as a mockery of rebirth. Holmes opened a drawer, drew out a small leather pouch. Inside lay a pinch of gray ash flecked with emerald sparks. "Recovered from the barge, the last of both mother and child. I shall post it to Benares with the anonymous note. Return to the river. Some truths are too small for Scotland Yard and too large for the grave." He tipped the ash into the fire. It flared once, green then gold, then vanished up the chimney toward whatever stars watch over repentant cities. The clock struck 3. Holmes rose, stretched, and for the first time in a week looked almost mortal. "Bed, Watson. Tomorrow Mrs. Hudson serves kippers, and the world will need 2 ordinary gentlemen who know nothing of eclipses." I banked the fire, turned down the gas. At the door I paused. "Holmes, do you ever regret the truths we bury?" He stood silhouetted against the dying embers, hands swollen, eyes bright. "Regret is the luxury of the innocent, Watson. We deal in necessities." The flame settled into ruby coals. Somewhere below, Mrs. Hudson's clock chimed the quarter. London slept, cocooned in snow and satisfactory lies. But the final revelation, the one Holmes whispered only to the flames, the price he paid for flinging Eleanor to her pyre, and the single drop of serum he kept hidden behind the tobacco jar. That is the quiet heart of Chapter 10. For now the threads are cut, the phantoms fled, and 221B Baker Street smells only of cocoa, violin rosin, and the honest smoke of applewood. Sleep well, listener. The darkness has revealed all it will. The rest is silence and the soft falling of snow. Chapter 10. The revelation in the hearth's glow. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving Baker Street muffled under a counterpane so thick that the milk carts sounded like toys. Mrs. Hudson's area steps were a perfect glacier. The lamplighter's ladder left blue holes straight to China. Inside 221B, the fire had burned to a heart of ruby coals. The gas was turned low. The clock ticked with the solemn patience of a judge who already knows the verdict. Holmes sat tailor-wise on the rug, left hand swaddled in fresh lint, a cup of cocoa balanced on one knee. I occupied the basket chair, feet to the fender, notebook closed for the last time. Between us, on the low table, lay the detritus of the case. The cracked crystal sphere now stoppered with wax. The Queen of Spades with her eyes gently shut. A single kid glove monogrammed EDL. And smallest and most terrible, a child's coral necklace. The beads still warm from the ashes we had scattered. Holmes spoke first, voice soft as the snow outside. "Every mystery, Watson, is a confession in disguise. Tonight we have heard 3. Hargrove's forgiven. Eleanor's silenced. The third is mine, and it is time you heard it entire." He lifted the coral beads, let them trickle through his fingers like slow blood. In the spring of 1880, I was 26, restless, and newly returned from a chemical tour of the continent. Montpellier, Prague, Vienna, laboratories thick with promise and thin on morals. In Vienna, I shared rooms with a medical student named Sigmund Freud. In Prague, I watched a conjurer named de Lacy make a duchess weep real tears with a mechanical nightingale. The conjurer had a daughter, Eleanor, 17, fierce, already able to hypnotize a lecture hall into believing the ceiling had become the floor. I was susceptible. He paused. The fire settled with a sigh. We corresponded. I sent her formulae for invisible inks. She sent me pressed violets and riddles in mirror writing. In the autumn, she wrote that her father had accepted a season in Calcutta, palace illusions for the lieutenant governor. Would I visit? I went. The voyage took 37 days. I spent 36 of them inventing a phosphorescent compound that would glow only under moonlight. An engagement gift, I told myself. Holmes turned the necklace until the largest bead caught the firelight. Inside, a faint green spark still swam. Eleanor met me at Garden Reach with this necklace already strung. She had refined my powder, bound it in coral, and named it Winter Fire. We walked the Maidan at dusk. She slipped the beads over my head and whispered that the first child to wear them would see truths hidden from the world. 9 months later, a daughter was born. My daughter, though no registry records it. We named her Lucia, after the Saint of Light. I found I could not speak. Holmes continued, voice steady, eyes on the coals. Cholera came in the rains of '81. The child was 3 months old. Eleanor, frantic, dosed her with an experimental serum. My powder, nightshade, a catalyst of her own. For one night, Lucia's eyes glowed like twin emeralds. She laughed at shadows only she could see. At dawn, she was dead. Eleanor wrapped the body in radium silk, so the darkness will know her soul and let it pass, and scattered the ashes in the Hooghly at the eclipse hour. I stood on the ghats and watched the current take everything I had foolishly believed was mine. He closed his fist around the necklace. The green spark vanished. I returned to London, buried the formula, and buried the man who had written it. Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective, was born on the voyage home, armored in logic, impervious to sentiment. I swore the winter fire would never burn again. The fire popped. A coal fell and scattered rubies across the hearth. Eleanor followed 5 years later. She had perfected the serum, turned grief into gospel, and founded the order to force the world to see what she had seen, that every heart hides a corpse. When Hargrove's warehouse received the radium tea, my own silk salvaged from the funeral shroud, she recognized the signature. The frost message, the phantom ship, the eclipse on St. Paul's, all of it a love letter written in fire, addressed to the only man who had ever walked away from her alive. Holmes opened his hand. The coral beads lay there, dull now, ordinary. On the bridge, when I flung her to the barge, I knew the fall would kill her. I chose London over mercy. That is the confession the darkness demanded, and the one I give freely. Here now, to the only witness I trust. He rose, crossed to the bow window, and drew back the curtain. Dawn was a pale promise behind the chimney pots. A solitary constable crunched past, lantern swinging. Lucia would have been 9 this Christmas. I have kept one. Bead, one spark. Tonight I return it to the light. He opened the window. The cold rushed in, hungry. Holmes lifted the necklace, kissed the glowing bead once, tender as any father, and let it fall. It spun downward, a tiny green star, and vanished into the snow between the area rails. Behind us, the fire settled into quiet ash. Holmes closed the window, turned the key in the sash. Case closed, Watson. The winter darkness is revealed, resolved, and, God willing, reconciled. Tomorrow we open a new ledger. There is a curious matter of a Hampshire vampire, and Mrs. Hudson has promised kippers. He moved to the sideboard, poured 2 fingers of brandy into cocoa dregs, and raised the cup. 2 absent daughters, he said, and to the men who failed them, may the snow cover us all. We drank. The mixture was bitter, sweet, and warming. Outside, the milk carts began their rounds. A church bell tolled 6. Somewhere a child laughed at the wonder of untouched snow. I set down my cup. And the moral, Holmes? He smiled, the real smile, rare as a white crow. That some truths are too bright for daylight. We carry them in pockets, in scars and coral beads no larger than tears. The world is kinder for not knowing them. And we, he touched the bandaged hand to his heart, are kinder for having known. He crossed to the mantel, took down the Persian slipper, and filled his oldest clay with the last of the Arcadian mixture. One more pipe, Watson, and then bed. The game is never afoot at dawn. It is merely waiting for the sun to catch up. I banked the fire, turned the gas to a blue bead, and left him there. Silhouetted against the window, smoke curling like a benevolent ghost. The room smelled of cocoa, brandy, applewood, and something ineffably gentle that had not been there before. At the door I paused. "Holmes, will you dream of green fire?" He did not turn. "Only if you leave the window open, old friend. Close it and the darkness stays outside where it belongs." I closed it. The latch clicked like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Outside, the snow began again, soft, forgiving, endless. Inside, the fire sighed its last and slept. And in the quiet heart of London, two ordinary gentlemen kept watch over secrets too large for headlines and too small for history. The winter darkness was revealed, and in the revealing, redeemed. Sleep well, listener. The hearth is warm, the door is barred, and somewhere a child's bead glows faintly beneath the snow, waiting for spring or judgment, or the next eclipse that will never come. The pipe smoke rises, the curtain falls, and the story, our story, ends not with a bang but with the softest of whispers. Merry Christmas, Watson. Merry Christmas, Holmes. And the snow keeps the secret.